Hey guys, here goes another senior moment. And over the years, the last few years, every once in a while somebody will ask me, how do you cut your patterns, or how did you get started cutting letters and numbers or whatever. So I thought I'd show you. This is an Onsrid. It's called an inverted router. And for those of you who've never seen one, it's really an amazing machine. Just as an example, this machine is probably 40 years old. It works just as good as right now. You'll see in a minute. Works just as good now as it did when I bought it 40 years ago. I paid $2,500 for it. Actually, I've got 3 of them. Only one of them I've got set up to actually use because I don't use them much anymore. But every once in a while it comes in pretty handy, and it's for all intents and purposes it could be used as a router table, but since it has an air cylinder on it here, I'll show you. I cut everything with patterns, unless I set it up as a router table, but I usually use patterns. Now it has a...
Dad, could you explain to them about the when you say cutting letters and numbers, because most of these people have only really seen the laser aspect, the second half of our business.
Right, I'll explain that as I'm cutting. As I'm cutting, I'm going to cut a number here. Okay. But what this is, it's a little bit different. We don't have the little palm router in this one. This is a 3.5 horse Porter cable router motor. It's big. This one I probably had rebuilt at least 2 or 3 times. I've got 2 or 3 of these around, but they last a long time. They last several years of pretty steady work. They'll last several years. The one I'm using in here now has probably been in there 4 or 5 years at least. So
I'll take that.
It's all right. I'm just going to set it aside, son.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, I'll just set it down here. And so now I'll show you what this Onsrid is. With the motor underneath, it comes up from underneath. When I press on this foot pedal, can you see the pedal, son?
I'm working my way down.
Okay, I'm going to press on this foot pedal and watch what happens now.
All right, so the foot pedal is there.
The foot pedal is there.
Coming back up.
And this is the cutter. Now I'm going to work the foot pedal so you can see what happens. When I press on the foot pedal, the cutter comes up. If I let it off completely, the air cylinder contracts. So here's what happens. I've got a pattern. This is a pattern. Actually, it's for the small ribbon pattern. And I'm going to cut everything that I'm going to cut now. I'm going to cut out a 1/4 inch. This is 1/4 inch oak plywood. So I'll show you. First, I'll cut the pattern so you can see how it's done. Now the patterns have little screws in the back. Can you see those?
Can you hold like a profile of them so they can see them protruding? So, yep. So if I zoom in there, they can see those are sticking out. Okay.
Right, okay. So what I did is after I made the pattern, most of the patterns I make up by hand. Or I did in the old days. Nowadays I make them with a laser. But I make a pattern and then I put a screw. I've got special screws that I buy that I drive in that have a real sharp point on them. And the screws are only to hold the pattern on the material. And so by putting the screws down on the material, and then I've got a rubber hammer. So what happens, see, I'm cutting from the back. And since those screw holes are in the wood and it's in the back, it doesn't affect anything. If I were going to make this into a sign, like if I had a straight bit in there and I'm going to make this into a sign, then the bit would come up and it would just, I would take that piece that I could cut 3/4 or 1 inch even if I want to. But here's what's going to happen. I'm going to press down again. You'll see this cylinder come down. And what happens is that comes down and engages the pattern. And I have the ability, if the pattern is thicker or whatever, I have the ability to raise it up and down. And the cutter, when I press on down, now that's all the way down, and I've got this preset for this 1/4 inch material. So what I'm going to do to begin with, I'm going to go ahead and turn this router on. It's going to make a little noise, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it on, and I'm going to cut
When
this.
I make the video, I'll make it lower volume.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it on and make this cut, then I'm going to turn it off, and I'll talk again in a minute. Now, one of the nice things about having it set up like this, you could probably see that the cutter was coming up but just barely clearing the wood. So I could put my fingers down around here if I wanted to. I don't do it, but if I wanted to, I could put my fingers down anywhere around here and there's no danger at all. So here's what happens now. After this is cut, this is the piece that it cut. Now this particular piece is not anything that we would use. I only did it because I had this 1/4 inch material here, but you can see, can you get in on that and show how it's rounded, son?
Yeah.
Okay, and what happens is that the cutter, see this is a radius cutter on here. The cutter has that radius. It could be a straight cut, which would leave a straight edge, but since I've got a radius cutter in there, puts a nice round over on that. We don't usually make products like this that we're going to carve, because we don't carve 1/4 inch. But now, for years, when I first started back in the 70s, I started the business making letters and numbers, and I make them in different sizes. Just as an example, I'll show you. I even make them down this small. This is a 2 inch or 1.5 inch.
2 inch.
2 inch. So I make them down this small. I've got patterns that I made for all different kind of fonts and stuff. So I do occasionally make them like this. And I do things like, this is just a star. This is the same kind of pattern that I just cut. And I can make almost any shape. The only thing is, if I have an internal cut, I have to be sure that the guide pin will fit in the internal cut, like on this number 8 that I'm going to cut right now. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. I'll be making a little noise again. This is an internal cut. Now you've noticed that there was internal cuts on here, but this is the 8 as it's finished. And any letter or any number, now this happens to be 10 inch. I make them up to 14 inch. I've made them larger, but I've got standard patterns for 6 inch, 8 inch. 6 inch would be, this would be a 6 inch letter. This would be a 10 inch letter. and I make them up to 14-inch letters. But you'll notice when I'm making, as I was cutting that, on an internal cut, what we call an internal cut, I dropped the cutter, or dropped the guide pin down. Then I came up with a cutter and I cut that. And then by taking my foot off of it and letting it come up, then I could go over to another cut. And after that cut is finished, I do the same thing, and then I do the internal or the external cut. And so it's really, this is what the Onsrid is all about. And like I say, I've had them. I started the business back in the 70s with routed wood signs. And in those days, I used to sell through hardware stores, lumber yards, and home centers. And over a period of time, I got a lot of requests because I used redwood, I got a lot of requests for redwood letters and numbers, which was really big in the 70s. And so my customers, the stores, my dealers, when I would make a redwood sign and take it in, they said, "Hey Dave, can you make redwood numbers?" And I resisted for a long time. And then I decided one day, I got so many requests for it, and I had a little spare time, so I made up a set of patterns. And I used to cut with with a hand router, Black & Decker hand router, with the template guides. And you can cut on a pattern like this with a hand router and template guides. And that's how I got started. And over a period of, I think that was in, say, 1970, and by 1974, I had grown to the point where I had a shop in the industrial park. Or actually, I had a shop that was an old reconditioned mortuary. Still had the crematorium in there that I used to burn the wood in, but that's another story. Yeah, that's another story. But anyway, I started making. Then I started making letters and numbers. I did it at first in my garage where I did all the signs, and then I slowly moved into the industrial park. Once I got into the industrial park, then I found out about these Onsrid. I went to a woodworking show, found out about these Onsrid, and even though they were $2,500, I thought, gee, that would really streamline our operation. So I bought one, and it worked out so well. I started making letters and numbers, and I started setting my dealers up with letters and numbers. Ace Hardware was a big customer, and home centers, and there were several lumber companies back in those days that don't even exist now. But all of my customers that I sold my signs through, nearly all of them wanted my letters and numbers as well. So at one time I had several hundred dealers that sold both the routed signs that we made plus the letters and numbers, and they were 3/4 inch thick. Redwood in those days, I got to where I was buying redwood by the truckload. I'd buy a big truck and trailer load of redwood at one time. Back in those days, I could buy a truckload for like $3,000. Now the same truck with a half a load, it'd probably be $30,000. So I don't use redwood much anymore. It's just way out of price for what I do.
So can you open the door so they can see the logo, the Onsrid logo on that?
Sure. Yeah,
this is a good. Yeah,
this is.
That's the name of the company that makes that machine.
Have you got a good?
Oh yeah,
good look at that.
Exactly what I wanted.
And these are just some magnets that I had made up at one time. That I still put on stuff now and then.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Good.
So that's now. The thing about this guide pin on here that I showed you, this particular one happens to be a 3/8, but I have 1/4 inch, and if I use a 1/4 inch guide pin, then the product will be a little smaller. But some of my smaller letters that I make, since they're real small, the internal cuts, I have to go in with an 1/8 inch guide pin. And sometimes they're even smaller than that. So I go in with a pointed guide pin. And it's just, these Onsrud routers are really, really versatile. I knew Charlie Onsrud and his two sons that I met back in those days at the shows that I'd go to. And I think they're all still around. I know the sons are, but the Onsrud is still around, but they're not like this anymore. They make them now. They've even got CNCs now. They got completely automatic routers. So anyway, folks, that was just, I thought, over the years I've had questions about it, and I thought that might be of interest to somebody. So I think what I'll do is I talked to Rick. I thought I'd make a video and just show you what the Onsrud's all about, show you what we used to do with it, and I still work with it, still make letters and numbers with it, so it's still a good machine, and I still like working with it. So that's the end of this one. We'll see you on the next one.